Welcome to Behind the Curtain IMO. I'm Betsy Jordan. I talked about the red margin, I didn't really tell you what that was all about. They've talked about blue waves, they've talked about red waves, they've talked about, these pithy little phrases that you use when you only have 10 seconds to say it. The red margin is something that justifiably happens in elections and definitely happened in the presidential election, and has happened probably in every presidential election, but we're clued into it because our races have been so close. The polls are saying that these candidates are neck and neck. We know that there have been, before I get to the red margin, let me go back here. The polls are saying that the races are neck and neck, particularly in the battleground states. And I'm talking about the presidential race. In some cases, all the way down the ballot. What we have here is we have a manipulation of that polling data. Not by the polling companies necessarily, but when someone is said to have funded a red poll, what they're doing is they're creating something that is favorable to Trump. And in the averages, it brings Kamala's vote down. So it looks legitimate, but we're not even sure how pollsters are getting at people these days. They're having to do a lot of boots on the ground in their polling work because, I don't know about you, but I'm not answering polls necessarily. I just don't. It's just one of those things where all this information is coming at us, and so that's not how I choose to invest my time. But we're running a campaign that is running as hard as we can go and wanting to answer the questions as they come up. The red margin. I want to clarify a couple of things in the beginning of this video that I neglected to do in the last one. President Biden came out and did say the only thing that is garbage is the supporters. And it was spun. He was reacting to what had happened, and what he did say is the supporter, meaning the comedian. Now look, would anyone blame him if he said the only thing that's garbage is your supporters out of frustration? Would anybody blame him for that? Yeah. But that's when they're trying to win elections. If they're really, really compassionate and understand he's very frustrated by all this nonsense. Still, Kamala is going to be president for all people, and President Biden, if you look at results, has been a president for all people in America, truly. So the proof is in the pudding, as they say. Kamala has broken tie votes in the Senate for the things that she will do when she is elected, and her plan is very clear. I wanted to clear that up about President Biden and what he said. I want to talk to you about the red margin, which I brought up in the last video, and I want to expound on that. But before I do, I want to talk to you about ways that the election has been deflected or the results been manipulated, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes that they don't want you to know. I want you to know that a lot of the polls that are coming out that are showing this race as close, we don't know whether or not we can trust them, not because of the polling companies necessarily, but because we know that there have been polls paid for where they're looking for specific kinds of results that are favorable to Trump. So they're getting their polling information from certain areas. That is bringing the overall average. For example, in Pennsylvania, it happened, I think they said about 20 to 30 times. I'm trying to understate that. But when they do that, it brings that polling data down. And so it looks like the race is closer than it actually might be. You see a lot of this, Trump's going to McDonald's because Kamala worked there. He's specifically wanting to work in French fries, which is where she said she worked. I'm not sure what they're trying to accomplish. Maybe Donald Trump is an everyman. But when he says things like, yeah, they really don't handle the fries with their hands, that's not an everyman kind of thing to say, actually. And then when he goes and he's in a garbage truck and he's posing to be a garbage man, I'm not sure how I'd feel if I was a real waste management person, or how I would feel if I worked at McDonald's every day. I think that's offensive, but they may be thicker skinned than I am about those things. There are things that are happening, as I mentioned, in Western North Carolina. Misinformation, disinformation, which serves to confuse the American public. And also the world at large, because this is definitely a world stage. Definitely other countries are holding their breath. There are business deals that aren't being made because they don't know how the economy is going to go or what decisions are going to be made. I will tell you the economy is going to be strong. I'm going to make this prediction that it won't matter who is elected president at this point. The market's going to go up a little bit. It may tank a bit and then it'll go back up. That's just my prediction. It's not my advice. I also want to talk about the red wave now. Not red wave, red margin. They predicted a red wave in 2022. That did not happen. They predicted a blue wave in 2020. That did happen. The red margin is something that happens in every presidential election. And this is why. Early in the evening, the results are going to come in that favor Republicans. And this is why. The results will come in from more rural areas, which is largely where the Republican base is. All right. So those votes are going to be counted earlier, not to mention they are results that are from smaller areas, so those votes are counted quicker. Sorry. Then in urban areas, more dense populations takes longer to count the votes, more literal votes. There are more Democrats than Republicans who order mail-in ballots. Those mail-in ballots take longer to count. So the count comes in later for the Democrats. So Donald Trump, what he did last time was he was declaring victory early, saying that we had won, Republicans won, right? We had won. Then it looked like when the Democratic votes were largely coming in later in the evening, that the Democrats were stealing the races. That's not what happened. That's just naturally what happens when you're counting the votes. It's how they come in. It's justifiable. So if he tries to declare winning the election early, you be the person who interrupts that thought. You tell the people around you, it's not won yet. Democratic votes come in later in the evening. That's how it is. So that we keep people a little calmer about this thing. Because that is how he justified saying that the election was stolen by Democrats. Don't let that happen. The red margin always happens early in the evening. This was Behind the Curtain IMO. Thank you for being here.
Stop scrolling. You need to hear this. Trump could use something called the red mirage to try to sabotage the election just like he did in 2020. So everyone needs to know about the red mirage and the blue shift. 3 key facts. Number 1, Republican votes tend to get counted first. I'll explain why, but what this means is that early on election night, Republicans appear to be doing better than they really are.
Only 4% of the vote is in. Trump is ahead by 39,000 votes.
This is the red mirage. But then, as more votes get counted, Democrats start to do better.
It shifted in the last several hours.
This is what's called the blue shift. Either party could win, but expect a stronger appearance for Republicans at the beginning than at the end. There's nothing mysterious about it. Votes are counted and then reported locally. Republicans tend to live in more sparsely populated areas, while Democrats tend to live in more densely populated ones. If there are fewer than 3,500 people living in red-leaning Tyrrell County, North Carolina, and over 1 million in blue-leaning Wake County, which do you think is going to finish counting votes first? It's a no-brainer that counties with a larger number of voters will have a larger number of votes that will take longer to count and end up getting tallied later in the evening and potentially into the coming days. On election night in 2020, the small, deep red counties in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada got done counting first, making it look like Trump was winning. But when the rest of the votes got counted, it turned around. Trump tried to make this sound suspicious and even dirty.
This election was over, and then they did dumps. They call them dumps, big, massive dumps. And all of a sudden, I went from winning by a lot to losing by a little.
But there's nothing out of the ordinary about the red mirage or blue shift, as the former political director of Fox News has testified.
In every election, and certainly a national election, you expect to see the Republican with a lead, but it's not really a lead.
So this red mirage, that's really what you expected to happen on election night.
Happens every time.
And this phenomenon has been compounded by Republican-controlled legislatures seemingly strategically reducing polling places in communities they perceive as more likely to vote Democratic. A study published ahead of the 2020 election found voters in predominantly black communities were 74% more likely to have to wait more than half an hour in line to vote. Guess what? The longer it takes to cast the votes, the longer it takes to count them. Number 2, Democrats are more likely to vote by mail. In Pennsylvania this year, there have been more than twice as many mail-in ballot requests from registered Democrats as Republicans. Mail-in ballots already take longer to count, but in many states, Republicans have imposed rules to make it take even longer. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are among the states where no matter how early the mail-in ballots are received, they can't even be processed until Election Day itself. In Pennsylvania, 1.7 million people have requested mail-in ballots this year. How long do you think it takes just to open 1.7 million envelopes? Number 3, Trump is likely to use the red mirage on election night to prematurely declare victory while the majority of votes are still being counted. That is exactly what he did in 2020.
Frankly, we did win this election.
And evidence brought to light by the January 6th committee suggests this was a premeditated plot.
We also interviewed Brad Parscale, President Trump's former campaign manager. He told us he understood that President Trump planned as early as July that he would say he won the election even if he lost.
In 2020, Trump tried to falsely claim that votes counted earlier in the night were somehow more legitimate than those counted later. He claimed that because he understood that the votes counted first would disproportionately come from his supporters. The red mirage is called a mirage because if you don't understand it, it's easy to be confused by it. That's why it's important that people know about it before any of the votes are counted, so no one is surprised by it. So please, share this video. Now chances are early voting has already started in your state, so why don't you put down your phone and go vote? I'm serious, what are you waiting for? You're still here, go, vote. I'm Alan Piper at apiper13. Follow Courier Newsroom for the election info you need. Wait, you're still here? The video's over. Go. Vote.